There's a road that I always drive through for work day after day. Although it was a quiet place, I didn't pay much attention to it, as it has always a few cars on the road. However, something started to bother me at some point. There was a man standing on the same side of the road almost every day with no expression. Late at night or early daybreak, it hasn't been long since I noticed he was always in the same place in all weather. So one day, I talked to my colleague about the man, and he suddenly said, "He seemed like a very famous man around that place. But you know what? No matter where you see him, you will always see his face from the front. No one has literally seen his back or even his side. Moreover, there are, strangely, many accidents on that road, so everyone says that's a curse from that dude. For now, everyone just passes him on the road and ignores him." I suddenly became curious about him. That day on my way back home from work, I was driving on the road where the man stood, and the man was standing there as usual and looking straight at me. As I was passing the side of him, I turned my head to see him sideways, but he was already staring at me straight in his face. Now I passed the man and looked into the side mirror to see his back, but still, he was looking at me straight. It made me feel creepy enough. After I arrived at home, another curiosity sprang up. So he kept staring at me, but I couldn't really see him moving. He definitely moved when I just took my eyes off for a moment. Then what happens if I keep staring at the man without taking my eyes off of him? The next day, I headed to the same place. It was time to put the way I thought yesterday into practice. And he surely stood in the same places, staring straight at me. I began to keep my eyes on him from the moment I first saw him and watched him until the moment I passed by. And of course, when I didn't take my eyes off him, he didn't look back at me either. The side of the mystery man began to be seen little by little, and I noticed that it was no different from the other ordinary person. But I felt excited like a child who had just discovered the hidden treasure. Besides, it would be perfect if I see his backside last. I had already turned my head 180 degrees and looked back dangerously before I knew it. I couldn't see the back well, so I was trying to turn back, putting my hands off the steering wheel. Now the back of him was finally seen by my eyes. Being satisfied, I was about to exclaim, and at that moment, bang! Then I suddenly lost my mind. When I woke up again, I was lying in the hospital, and fortunately I was not seriously hurt though. What a stupid. Why did I do that? Was I possessed by something? While thinking about those things, a man in a police uniform knocked on the door of the room and came inside. "Hi, I came here to hear what happened to you yesterday." So I frankly confessed that I had acted rashly to see the back of the man standing on the road and admitted that the accident had happened. I told him that I don't know why I suddenly thought so. Just then, the cop who was listening to me without saying anything said to me, and that one sentence that he had told me still remained in my head long after the incident. Since that day, I've been avoiding the road wherever I go to work or come back home. Shoot, that dude didn't take you this time.
A few years back, I was a shift manager for a local big box pharmacy and convenience store. It was right across my backyard, and I could probably sprint there in under a minute if I really wanted to, so it really worked out for me. I was in my late 30s. I worked out quite a lot, and while I was fit, I was still a smaller girl. Even though I was married, I would constantly get hit on and asked out. It was pretty flattering, but it always made me feel really awkward. Now, this particular store I worked at was in a really weird part of town. It was on the right side of town to attract the Karens, but close enough to the not-so-good side of town to attract the drug addicts, drunks, and psychopaths. Anyway, let me say that I'm not someone that gets scared easily. I've had someone high on meth crash their car into the side of the store, causing the back of our store to bend inward because we didn't carry pineapple juice. I had a man pick me up and throw me over his shoulder and start walking out the door with me, saying that I'd make a good wife. Yeah, that's one for another time. Anyways, It all started on a Sunday morning. I remember this because I was really busy building end caps and making sell signs. I was working with my favorite coworker, so the day was flying by and I was really bubbly this day. There was a man and his son that came into the store and they made a beeline for me. The man was probably just a little under 6 foot and he was skinny. The man had dreadlocks and a long skinny silver earring dangling from his ear. He also had this really tan trench coat that I found really odd because it was summer. Nonetheless though, I had then greeted them and asked if they needed some help. The man spoke with a really thick Jamaican accent and he said that his GPS stopped working and he wanted to see if we had any. I let out a really small laugh, thinking he was messing with me. No, that would be at Best Buy or something, but we do have a small section of electronics on this wall over here. I indicated the wall to the back of me.
Oh, thanks,
he said, taking a look but also keeping his eyes on me. Something about those eyes just really chilled me. He was speaking another language to his son, but I kept going on about my task for the day, and he would call me to help him, asking me questions about chargers and SD cards. I answered them, and then he started telling me how beautiful I was. Really awkwardly, I had thanked him.
You must work out, yeah?
He asked. Yeah, yoga mostly. I replied while getting more and more uncomfortable now. He made some more comments about my body, telling me how he loved my tattoos, and he was just really being a creep. I tried to stay polite though, and eventually I just walked away to do some more work. I started to avoid him, but he was still staring at me. The man had his phone out, and I kept hearing the shuddering of a camera. I went to the office to tell my other coworker that I thought the guy was taking my picture, and I was just really feeling uncomfortable. He then came out and watched over me. Shortly after my coworker came out, the man and his son then left. By the time the end of my shift came, I forgot about him. A few weeks later, I was up front ringing customers with a different coworker. We were crazy busy that day, but I was the manager on duty. After we got the line down, my coworker then handed me an envelope. What's this? I asked her. I don't know, some man in dreadlocks told me to give it to you, she said. I took the envelope and I went into my office with it. Inside of the envelope were dozens and dozens of pictures of me. My heart sank. I had no idea that these were taken. Most of them were of me in the store while working, some of me walking home, and some even with me and my daughter. I felt sick. There was also a note with it. It said something along the lines of,
You're so beautiful. I'm in love with you. I'd be a much better husband than what you have now. Please give me a chance.
There was more to it, but it's in police evidence now. The guy really stupidly left his name and address. I then called our store manager as well as the police. They took our camera footage, my statement, and the pictures and letter. They told him that he really needed to stay away from me or the next time he's getting arrested and he's banned from the store. I was really relieved but still really bothered by it. A few more weeks to about a month then went by. It was another really busy Sunday night. It was just myself as the manager on duty and we had another coworker as my cashier. We were ringing things up together when I noticed a man staring at me. The man was tall with a medium build. He had dreadlocks and he had the same earring and long trench coat as the other man did. This man was really scary. His eyes were just cold and really dead and angry. It felt like they were staring right through my soul. He didn't have anything to purchase, just stood and stared. I tried to smile politely at him, then another wave of customers came. I got lost in helping everyone, but didn't see the man anymore. Even when things calmed down, I still didn't see him. I decided to go start facing the back of the store, and I told my coworker to call me if she needed me. As I was back there, I heard that Jamaican accent and all over. I looked up at the mirror to see that same scary man on the phone.
Yeah, she's here. No, it's just one other girl here with her. I can grab her when she leaves. No problem.
I was absolutely horrified. He didn't see me, so I slowly made my way up to the front. I briefly tell my coworker what's going on and then call the police and store manager. The cops took him away. A few days later, a detective came to speak to me. The two men were brothers. They were abducting women and actually using them for human trafficking. He told me I was really lucky. I later found out that they had apparently found a woman beaten to death in their apartment. They've both since gone to prison. This still gives me really bad nightmares. What happened to that woman could have easily been me, but thank God it wasn't.
The events of the story take place over the course of a few nights. Before we get there, I need to provide a little bit of backstory. My husband and I had just moved to New York City, like right in the heart of the city. The apartment was breathtaking. I kept thinking that it was a loft apartment you would see in a movie or a television show. My husband was fortunate enough to land a well-paying job that allowed us to afford this beautiful apartment. My favorite part was the view. At night, you could see all the lights from the city out of the windows. It didn't take long for my husband to make some friends at work. He's a very social person, and being in sales for a decade makes it easy for him to strike up a conversation with anyone. Almost a year into living in the city, we had our weekend crew that we would hang out with routinely. We would have dinner, play games, or just have some drinks with Becky and Jim, as well as another couple, Jason and Liz. But my husband's best friend from the city was a man named Eric. Eric did not have a significant other, but never came alone. He always had a friend that he would bring. He would always joke with me and my husband, "Don't worry, guys. You never have to worry about me being the third wheel." This turned into a reoccurring joke, and Eric was almost referred to as this third wheel. One night after one of our little get-togethers, my husband and I were getting ready for bed. We talked for a while, but I'm pretty sure I fell asleep mid-sentence. I woke up at some point in the middle of the night. I didn't look at the time, but it was still dark, so before 5 a.m. if I had to guess. I heard a noise, and I know that it's what woke me up. I just laid in bed, feeling a bit uneasy, and looked up in the dark room. I thought I could see a figure of some kind in the corner of the room. The more I tried to focus, the more and harder it was to see. I felt as if though I could almost hear something like breathing or wheezing. After a few minutes, I felt much better and chalked it up to some kind of vivid nightmare and rolled over back to bed. I was too scared in the moment to look and didn't want to wake my husband up for something that was probably just a giant overreaction. The next night came and same story. We went to bed at around 11. I didn't tell my husband about the events of the night before. Again, I was awoken in the middle of the night. This time I looked at the time and it was shortly after 4 a.m. I could for sure hear breathing this time. I looked around the room from the bed, but this time I couldn't see any figures like I did the night before. I could just hear the breathing and it felt so close. I tried waking up my husband, but he was out cold. I didn't try awfully hard because he had to wake up in about an hour for work. I didn't sleep well the rest of the night, and I woke up with him in the morning and did not want to stay in the bedroom alone when he left. I moved to the living room and slept on the couch for a couple of hours. The day was miserable. I couldn't shake the weird feeling for the entire day. Around 2 in the afternoon, I took a shower. When I turned the shower off and was drying my hair in the bathroom, I heard something from outside the bathroom door. I froze in paranoia in the bathroom and listened with my ear to the door, but heard nothing. Finally, I worked up the courage to leave the bathroom and felt a minor moment of relief when I was in fact still alone in the apartment. Shortly after 5, my husband came home from work and I told him about the events of the last 2 nights. At first he laughed as if though I were telling him a joke. Once he realized how freaked out I was, he then began to try and rationalize what I could have been seeing and hearing. I have to say, I was insulted because he even suggested that maybe I had too much to drink, but that was not the case whatsoever. He then said in a reassuring voice, "Listen, if it happens again, just wake me up, and I'll search the room." This actually did give me some relief that I was able to talk to him about it. However, I was still anxious that I would hear or see something again. That night came quickly, and I was so tired from the previous night that I fell asleep even though I was practically petrified to go to bed. Again, right around 3:30 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of breathing, and it was undeniable at this point. I looked around the room and saw nothing, just like the previous night. I woke up my husband and told him to listen. He said he could hear the breathing too. He sprang from the bed and turned on the light. There was thankfully nobody standing in the room. That brief moment of solace ended quickly when that nightmare came true. My husband walked over to the walk-in closet, and emerging from under the bed was our friend Eric. He sprinted towards my husband, who was now in the closet, and tackled him. I screamed in panic, absolutely freaking out. I jumped from the bed and tried to make a run for the door. My plan was to just yell in the hallway until someone hopefully heard me. I didn't even make it to the door before Eric had caught me. I screamed as loud as I could, and thankfully in that quick moment my husband sprang out and tackled Eric in return. I ran to the cell phone and called the police. My husband is a fairly large man and was able to get Eric to the ground and keep him there and subdue him until the cops showed up. To the police's credit, they showed up incredibly fast. My husband only had minor scrapes and bruises, but had a pretty big knot on his head. When the cops were arresting Eric, we could hear him saying, "I didn't want to be the third wheel anymore. I didn't want to be the third wheel anymore." What's even more disturbing is that he told the police he was inside of our apartment for a couple of days. He had somehow stolen my husband's key and made a copy of it. He was apparently breaking into the apartment for weeks, but had been staying during the night for the last few days. I'm not sure why he didn't try anything while we were sleeping or any of the times myself or my husband were alone in the apartment. It still freaks me out thinking that this man was inches from where I slept. We're now back in my hometown and not living in the city anymore. The terror you feel being trapped that high up in the sky with nowhere to run has made me extremely claustrophobic. You never know what people are capable of, even people you consider close friends. The police did inform us that Eric stated he didn't intend to hurt either one of us that night, but the look in his eyes told us a completely different story.
This happened to me about 6 years ago. I'm now 26 and I'm also married with 2 awesome kids. For some context, I'm a guy. This is what happened to me. I tried so many times to leave my ex-girlfriend, who we'll call Sarah. Whenever I would tell her that I wanted to see other people or that I should move out so that we have room to breathe, she would always go crazy and threaten to kill or cut herself or even drive her car off of a bridge. Mind you, where I live, there really isn't any bridges. Anyways, one day I run into my ex-girlfriend, who we'll call Rachel, at the mall. We ended on good terms, so we had actually talked like nothing happened. I had told Rachel about my situation with Sarah and how I really wasn't happy with her, and that I was really scared that she was going to do something to harm herself. Rachel told me if I was really worried that much that I should let one of her family members know. So one day during work, I called her on my lunch and told her we should have dinner and talk. I also ran to our place and got all of my things and my dogs and moved everything back into my parents' house. I know, that's really messed up, but you have to understand that she was crazy, like really crazy. When we went to dinner, I told her in public that we should break up because I just wasn't happy anymore. And to be honest, I really hadn't been for a while. I mean, we had been together for about 3 years and I just wasn't happy. I had actually told her a few months after we started dating that I thought we were better off as friends. Anyways, so we break up and I go back to my parents' house, which they really weren't happy about because they knew how she was and they were really scared that she was going to do something to the house, or maybe even worse. They wanted me to go to a family member's house instead, but I mean really, who would actually take 2 big dogs and me on top of this giant load of drama? Later that night, when me and my dad are talking in the living room, All of a sudden, we hear the sound of my truck alarm then go off and the sound of glass break. My heart sank. I just knew it was Sarah. I go outside, calmly trying to talk to her like an adult, and she just starts hitting me and spitting in my face, telling me I'm a piece of crap and all these other crazy things. I kid you not, I didn't touch her not one time, and I never raised my voice. I tried to get her to relax and at the same time telling my dad everything was okay. I can handle this, just go back inside. Finally, after about a half hour of just getting hit and yelled at, she eventually leaves, peeling out of my parents' neighborhood. Let's fast forward a few days later. I end up getting a visit from the cops asking where I was the night of this night and blah blah blah. You know how it goes. I tell them, but they don't believe me. They say that they want to take me downtown for some questions. Being the decent person that I am, I decide to go willingly. And well, what do you know? It turns out that she had filed a report on me saying that I beat her and also held her at gunpoint to get all of her money from her safe, and that I also wanted the PIN numbers to her card. For a while, I didn't even say anything because I was just so shocked at this point. I then tell the cops, "Look at me. I'm the one that has cuts and bruises here. She did that. I didn't do anything to her." Their response, "Sir, she's a lady. We have to hear her side on this, and we're going to need to take some DNA samples from you." Well, I give them what they need, and long story short, I'm thrown in jail waiting for a hearing. About 2 weeks go by and the results came back, and you guessed it, totally negative. Also, I forgot to mention this, but me and Rachel ended up getting back together, but the harassment never stopped. Sarah made it impossible for me to move on with my life. For almost a year, I would get constant visits from cops asking why I was stalking her. Sarah even hired a private investigator to follow me and Rachel around. Every time I got a visit from a cop, I always had something backing me up on where I was whenever Sarah claimed I was stalking her. She had 4 restraining orders filed against me when I never even had anything to do with her. Finally, the judge was sick of it. I guess he had finally seen just how crazy she was because he didn't issue any more restraining orders after that. Me and Rachel almost didn't make it through this. Sarah made my life hell, but I'm really glad I ended things with her. So Sarah, wherever you are, I really hope you find the help you need, and I pray and hope no other man ever has to go through this.
For the past few weeks, me and my friend have been using the app Randonautica. One night recently, me and Daniel went to the movies. When the movie ended, it wasn't that late, so we came up with the idea to grab some food and use the app. We searched for creepy locations, and the app gave us a destination to drive to. The app was taking us to a quiet part of the highway. We had to pull over by an abandoned rest stop and walk the rest of the way because there were no roads heading into where the app was telling us to go. Me and Daniel walked towards the woods and climbed over an old rusty fence. We carried on walking into the woods with about 5 minutes left until we reached our destination. We came prepared and brought with us flashlights as we've been doing this often. We finally arrived to the location where the app was leading us to, and it led us to a cabin. It was hard to tell if someone was using this or it was left abandoned. Daniel asked if we should go inside and look around. I said, I don't know. It could be someone's property. Daniel eventually convinced me to check it out. There weren't any cars around or lights in the cabin, and we were kind of in the middle of nowhere, so I agreed. We entered the cabin by going through the front door as it was unlocked. Just like the outside, the cabin looked abandoned but also like someone had been living there. The downstairs was relatively normal. We went upstairs and there was only one room. We assumed it to be a bedroom, and after opening the door, we were right. The room was not normal, however. Someone had nailed pages from what I assumed was a Bible all over the walls and ceiling. Scattered on the floor were more Bibles and Bible pages that had been ripped out. If this wasn't creepy enough, there was a bag sitting on the bed. I looked inside and there was a small Bible, a box of matches, a large rusty pair of scissors, and a hammer that had blood on it. I showed Daniel what was in the bag, and he said we should probably leave. As we went downstairs, Daniel stopped me and told me to be quiet. After listening out carefully, we heard men talking in the near distance. Then I noticed, through the window, about 6 or 7 flashlights in the woods approaching the cabin. We quietly left through the front door again and started jogging back to where the car was. We hopped the fence and drove back home. That night, Daniel texted me with a picture of a news article that he had read that was posted 2 days ago. Man brutally murdered in his home. He was found with Bible pages stuffed in his hand. I keep thinking that those men by the cabin we found were responsible for that man's murder. And if we had been caught in their cabin, me and Daniel might have suffered the same similar fate.
I grew up in the Midwest United States. During the 90s, my family lived in a tight-knit community, and we would often have get-togethers and barbecues with our neighbors. It was truly the American dream. My brother and I were very good friends with all the kids from our neighborhood, and whenever we'd have one of these gatherings, all the kids would get together for a game of manhunt. To avoid any of the back and forth of who would be chosen as the hider and the seekers, my brothers and I would usually volunteer to be the seekers. There was this giant forest area outside of our neighborhood where the games would take place. And since we would often go fishing with my dad around this area, we knew it pretty well. You could say we were all very competitive. I remember it was the 4th of July, 1996. The entire community threw a party at the neighborhood park. And of course, this meant that we kids were going to have our traditional game of manhunt, one of the biggest we've ever had, and it would take place after the fireworks show. By the time the fireworks stopped, I'd say it was around 9:30 p.m. Shortly after, we gathered everyone for a game and began around 9:45. Things started out like any other game. We caught most of the low-level hiders within the first 10 minutes. However, there were still some of the older kids hiding out in some of the more obscured areas of the park. We were always told never to go too deep into the woods. To give you some perspective, the park we were at was at the very back of our neighborhood. Beyond that was the forest that went on for about 3 miles before you got to the highway that led into town. There was no hunting allowed in this forest because of its proximity to residential areas, so we would often see a lot of deer and other animals roaming about. Anyways, the game went on for a while longer, and despite their best efforts, we apprehended most of the hiders, except for a girl who was about 8 years old. We'll call her Ashley. I found this to be very odd because Ashley wasn't the best hider. We made our way to the small lake besides the clubhouse. This was the last area we would check before letting someone know that we couldn't find Ashley. It was about this time that I began to feel this sinking feeling in my stomach. I was only 11 years old at the time, but I could tell there was something wrong. I distinctly remember seeing the moon reflecting brightly upon the surface of the water as we made our way around the lake. When we got to the far side of the lake, we started hearing a strange noise coming from within the trees. It sounded like someone was being brutally stabbed over and over again, but no screams were accompanying the awful sound. The 3 of us approached the tree line. When my brother pointed his flashlight into the trees, we saw a hooded figure with its back turned to us. They appeared to be kneeling down and stabbing at something with a large hunting knife. As soon as the beam of light fell upon the figure, it immediately stopped what it was doing and stood up. The next thing I remember is my oldest brother covering my eyes with his free hand and telling us to run back to the park. The 3 of us took off and ran towards the party. I remember hearing the sounds of thudding boots tearing through the bush behind us. And as soon as we got back to the party, my older brother told my dad about the man in the woods. The rest of the night is a blur to me. I only remember seeing the police showing up, and me falling asleep in my dad's arms. The next morning I was told that Ashley ended up leaving with her parents while the game was still going on, which explains why we couldn't find her. I didn't get a good look at what the hooded man had been stabbing at, but I could tell there was something wrong. I distinctly remember seeing the moon reflecting brightly upon the surface of the water as we made our way around the lake. The next morning I was told that Ashley ended up leaving with her parents while the game was still going on, which explains why we couldn't find her. I didn't get a good look at what the hooded man had been stabbing at, but my brother told me it was a deer carcass. Looking back, I suppose we could just chalk it up to someone hunting in a restricted area. But there's still something that bothers me. What kind of person rapidly stabs at a dead deer in the dark? And even though he was nowhere to be seen by the time we got back to the party, I'm certain that he was chasing us, at least for a short distance. It makes me wonder what he would have done if he'd caught us. That was the very last game of Manhunt our neighborhood ever played.
It happened when I was in middle school. One day my family decided to visit my mother's parents' house after a long time. The house was located in a rural area. There's a big road with a convenience store and a gas station around my grandparents' house. And down there in the middle is a small trail that takes a long walk to get there. It was located in the most isolated part of the village. So whenever I walked along the trail, all I could see was a bamboo forest or a large area of rice paddies, fields, and streetlights. And the streetlights are all worn out, so only a few of them are operating properly. As soon as we arrived, I greeted my grandparents and had a really nice and delicious meal with them. Well, it was pretty good then. The next evening, all the relatives gathered at my grandparents' house. My parents and others said that they were going to see the nightscape of the night sea with my grandparents. But at that time, my cousin and I weren't interested in that much, so we decided to stay at home. We were chatting for a while, and it suddenly started to rain. Then my mom called me to check the door and go to bed early, saying that they were going to stay the night in one of the relatives' houses because it was too late to go back. So we were sitting back and chatting and watching TV. Some kinds of that after checking if we locked the door well. After a while, my cousin kept pestering me, saying that he's hungry. I said, "Hey, would you like to go to buy some snacks together? There's a convenience store over there." "No, I'm scared to go out right now." Well, my cousin was such a coward boy. And in my case, I wasn't scared at all. I could walk at night or watch horror movies by myself. Eventually, I ended up coming out alone to get some snacks for him. Light drizzle was falling at that time, so I left the porch without an umbrella and stared at the trail. And at that very moment, I felt really weird. I got goosebumps at first. However, I soon ignored it and went straight to the convenience store to buy some snacks. I mean, everything was fine until then. As soon as I left the convenience store, the rain poured heavily. Holy crap, I should have brought an umbrella. Mumbling like that, I started to rush to the house. At that instant, the lightning suddenly flashed. Slowly frightened, I started running faster. When I reached the middle of the trail, I saw the muddy road and the broken streetlights. And something was dropping over the muddy road. I couldn't see it clearly because it was too dark around, but something like a pebble kept falling under the streetlights. And when I looked up at the streetlight, my heart literally sank. I saw a silhouette of a person hanging upside down on a streetlight and holding on its column. It was a woman, and she was hanging like a monkey. You know what I mean. I was so surprised that I couldn't try to run away, just stared blankly at her. At that moment, there was another flash of lightning, and every time it flashed, the woman's face was clearly seen. Her crying face, smiling face, and a face with no expression. Looking at that face, my body was cold and stiff. I couldn't move my legs at all. The lightning stopped soon, and I couldn't see the woman anymore because the surrounding of the trail was dark again. I then started screaming and rushing toward home. It was then she was laughing out loud. Shoot, if I turn around, she'll kill me, for sure. I ran like a crazy person, and when I got to the house, I screamed, hitting the front door with my body. My cousin came out, opened the door, and asked me if I saw a ghost or something. But I couldn't tell him what I saw because I was afraid he might be scared. I was thinking if I should call my parents to come over quickly, but somehow I didn't think they would believe me. So I just thought I might have seen something wrong, and eventually decided to sleep like that. But I couldn't sleep well that night. I kept feeling weird. There was a bamboo forest right next to the window in the room, and the sound of bamboo leaves hitting the window was so creepy. Feeling uncomfortable, I turned to the window. And there was someone else. Someone was standing by the window looking inside our room. I couldn't scream again. Covering myself with blanket, I was shivering and thinking I shouldn't move. But then I heard a strange sound of a song. I didn't know exactly what song he was singing, but his trembling voice gave me goosebumps enough. It has been singing like that for a while, and then it started knocking on the window. Open the door. It was neither a woman nor a man. Knock, knock. Open the door. Knock, knock. Open the door. It kept talking like that in a deep, low voice. But suddenly, open the door! It was howling in an extremely high voice, and soon the voice was turning into laughter. I recognized that the laugh was exactly the same voice I heard when I'd run off the trail a few hours ago. I had no choice but waited for the sound to disappear, and I guess I fell asleep so faintly. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of the phone ringing. At first, I was even afraid about the sound of a ringtone, so I didn't come out from my blanket until Mom and the other adults came back. After a few hours, my cousin suddenly approached me and said like this, "Hey, did you hear anything strange last night?" To my surprise, my cousin also heard that weird song, knocking sound, and the laughter yesterday. So, it was not a dream. At first, we were planning to stay one more day, but I begged my parents to go back home and I could come home right away that day. What the heck was that thing I saw on the trail that day? Do you think it followed me? Well, it's still a mystery that hasn't been solved to this day.
This happened when I was in college. One day, I decided to sleep at my friend's house. After having fun eating takeout with my friend and chatting for a while, we both laid down to sleep. Then I suddenly started hearing the sound of a wooden percussion that is typically used in Korean temples. However, as my friend and I were sincere Buddhists, I just laughed and then fell asleep, thinking it was a hallucination. About a month later, I met her again at a cafe near her house, and I made a joke. "Hey, did you turn on the Buddhist broadcast at your house that day? I kept hearing the sound of a wooden instrument when I slept over at your house." Then my friend suddenly looked serious and asked me if I heard it, and she abruptly called her mother, trembling. "Hey, Mom, my friend heard it too. What should I do now?" In confusion, I asked what was going on, and my friend suddenly cried and said, "I keep experiencing sleep paralysis ever since I started living in that house. I've been suffering this for 5 months, not 1 or 2 days. I can't live like this anymore." She then confessed that she'd been staying at a nearby motel. It was fine at first, but she started to have sleep paralysis more and more, even when she was in the motel. I was so surprised when she told me this. To reassure her, I told her to pack up right away, check out of the motel, and come to my house. Then she cried even harder this time, and she said she's too scared to enter that house by herself. She asked me to go with her, so we took a taxi and went back to her house. However, the moment I went into her house, I thought I was going to cry too, and I was sure that something was wrong. As soon as I opened the door, I suddenly smelled rotten water. My friend had a goldfish at the time, and there wasn't even a drop of water left in the fish tank. The fish was dried up and laid there dead. We ran out of the house without even thinking about packing her stuff up. We didn't go back to my house right away. Instead, we wandered around the crowded streets for a long time before returning. When we finally returned to my house, we both sat on my bed thinking for a long time about what we had to do, and then fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, I noticed that there were several missed calls from my mom. When I called her back, she asked me, "Are you at home with someone right now?" "Why, Mom?" I asked her, almost crying out of fear, and then she told me about her dream. In her dream, a tall, skinny, and abnormally big-eyed man was looking through my window in black clothes. Why isn't she coming out? Why? He muttered this while watching me. Mom ran towards him shouting, "What are you doing?" Then she suddenly woke up from her dream. So I was honest and confessed to my mom about my friend's house, and she told me not to go anywhere with her. She lived in my house for about a month. One of her mother's relatives was a shaman, and she suddenly got mad when she talked about her daughter, and then advised my friend to stay close to me. I think her house might have been possessed by a ghost. I thought about why he couldn't come inside my house. I guess it's because my mom bought some ceremonial salt before I moved into this house. And one of my relatives, who was a monk, once visited my house to pray for me while I was away. Maybe that's why. My friend later told me that she had moved out of the house, and the owner actually accepted her request without any complaints. I think cheap houses like those always have a legitimate reason. And fortunately, she's doing very well now.
My father's grandmother once told him a story of a man from the 1900s in Mexico that had a very heart-stopping experience. Said man, let's call him Jose, a very common Mexican name, loved to drink. So he and one of his friends are finishing drinking at a local bar one night. When they leave the bar, they say their goodbyes and go their separate ways for the evening. As I stated before, it's Mexico in the 1900s. For most people, you either traveled by your own 2 feet or by horse. Luckily for Jose, he had a horse. So off he went, back to his home late at night, taking the dirt trails. Along the way, he passes under a bridge. As he comes out the other side, he begins to hear what sounds like a child crying. He stops and gets off his horse. He looks in the direction of the crying. He soon finds the source of the crying. It's a little boy crying all alone. He asks the child if he's all right.
"I'm lost. Can you help me?"
Jose, of course, agrees to help the little boy, so he picks him up and places him on the rear of the saddle. He gets back on, and then they're on their way. As they travel along, Jose feels the little kid poke his back a few times. So Jose asks what's the matter. The young boy responds,
Daddy, look.
I grew teeth." When Jose looks back, he's face to face with a horrifying sight. What was once a little boy now set a dark figure with rows of sharp, long white teeth smiling at him, with a pair of eyes that radiated death itself. Turning white with fear, Jose's only reaction was to pull back the reins of the horse, which causes the horse to fall backwards. Luckily, he didn't get caught in the middle and just fell off the back. Jose wasted no time getting up and looking for his horse, but unfortunately the horse had been spooked and ran off into the night. Jose proceeded to do the same and hightail it out of there, not even daring to test his luck. He didn't look back. The following day, when his friend asked to go for some drinks, he said only a little, because he didn't want to stay too late.
Son, we need to talk about internet safety. I slowly crumpled down onto the floor next to him. His laptop was open and he was playing Minecraft. Comments scrolled down the side of the screen in a chat box, and I could see his eyes were locked into the action. Son, can you stop your game for a minute? He then closed the laptop and looked up at me. Dad, is this going to be another cheesy, scary story? What? I faked hurt feelings for a second. Then I grinned at him. I thought you liked my tales. He grew up listening to my stories about children who encountered witches, ghosts, werewolves, and trolls. And like many generations of parents, I use scary stories to reinforce morals and teach lessons about safety. Single dads like me should use all the parenting tools at their disposal. They were fine when I was 6, but now that I'm getting older, they don't scare me anymore. If you're going to tell a story about the internet, can you make it really, really scary? I squinted at him incredulously, and he folded his arms and said, Dad, I'm 10 and I can handle it. Okay, I'll try. I began. Once upon a time, there was a boy named Colby. He sighed deeply. It was sure that his expression indicated that he wasn't impressed by the introduction. I continued. Colby went online and joined several children's websites. After a while, he started talking to other kids in-game and on the message boards. He made friends with another 10-year-old boy named Helper23. They liked the same video games and shows, they laughed at each other's jokes, and they explored new games together. After several months of friendship, Colby gave Helper23 6 diamonds in a game they were playing. This was a very generous gift. Colby's birthday was coming up, and Helper23 wanted to send him a cool present in real life. And Colby figured it wouldn't hurt to give Helper23 his home address, as long as he promised not to tell it to any strangers or grown-ups. Helper23 swore he wouldn't tell anyone else, not even his own parents, and set about mailing the package. I paused the story and asked my son, Do you think that was a good idea? No, he said, shaking his head vigorously. In spite of himself, he was getting into the story. Well, neither did Colby. Colby felt guilty about giving away his home address, and his guilt began to grow. By the time he put on his pajamas the next night, his guilt and fear were larger than anything else in his life. He resolved to admit the truth to his parents. The punishment would be steep, but it was worth it to have a clear conscience. He squirmed in his bed as he waited for his parents to tuck him in. My son knew the scary part was coming up. He leaned forward, wide-eyed, and I spoke quietly and deliberately. He heard all the noises of the house. The washing machine bounced around in the laundry room. Branches scraped against the brick outside his room. His baby brother cooed in the nursery. And there were some other noises he couldn't quite pinpoint. Finally, his dad's footsteps echoed down the hall. Hey, Dad! He called out nervously. I have something to tell you. His dad stuck his head in the doorway at a weird angle. In the darkness, his mouth didn't seem to move, and the eyes were all wrong. Yes, son? The voice was way off, too. Are you okay, Dad? He asked. Uh-huh, sung the father in his strangely affected voice. Colby pulled his covers up defensively. Is Mom around? Here I am. Mom's head popped into the doorway below Dad's, and her voice was an unnatural falsetto. Were you about to tell us that you gave our home address to Helper23? You shouldn't have done that. We told you to never give out personal information on the internet. She continued. He wasn't really a kid. He just pretended to be one. Do you know what he did? He came to our house, broke in, and murdered both of us, just so he could spend some time with you. A fat man in a wet jacket emerged in the doorway holding the 2 severed heads. Colby shrieked and gasped as the man dropped the heads on the ground, unsheathed his knife, and moved into the room to work on the boy. My son screamed too. He twisted his hands defensively over his face. But we were just getting started with the story. After several hours, the boy was almost dead, and his screams had become whimpers. The killer noticed the wailing of a baby in another room and removed his knife from Colby. He had never murdered a baby before and was excited about the prospect. Helper 23 left Colby to die and followed the cries through the house. In the nursery, he walked to the crib, picked the baby up, and held it in his arms. He moved towards the changing table to get a better look, but as he held the baby, the crying died down. On the contrary, he looked up and smiled. Helper 23 had never held a baby, but he gently bounced it in his arms like a pro. He wiped his bloody hands on the blanket so he could stroke the baby's cheek. "Hey there, sweet little guy." His beautiful rage of sadism melted into something warmer and softer. He walked out of the nursery, took the baby home, named him William, and raised him as his very own. After I finished the story, my son was visibly shaken. "But Dad, my name's William," he stammered. I gave him a classic dad wink and tousled his hair. "Of course it is, son." William ran up the stairs to his bedroom in a fury of sobs. I think he liked my story.
Two years ago, when I was 19 back then, we'd just moved to a new house. It was newly built, and although it's not that big size, but at least we were satisfied that we have our own house. One day it was on a rainy night, and I was walking alone in the dark street. Because it was almost midnight, there were no vehicles at all at the time. I was returning home from my friend's house nearby, for it was her birthday on that day. While I was walking, I felt like someone was behind following me. However, when I looked back, there was just an empty street. I felt strange, but I was feeling relieved because I was already in front of our main door. Then the incident suddenly happened. As I tried to grab a key in my purse, a stranger held on my wrist. It was a guy, and he definitely didn't look normal at all. He had a big grin on his face, and his big and red eyes are bulging out. When I looked around, there was no one else on the street. Considering it was in the middle of the night, it was no wonder. I got panicked. I grabbed my wrist and tried to kick him, screaming out. Then he laughed and let go of me, and I banged on the door and shouted as loud as I could, "Help! Help me! Open the door!" My dad quickly opened the door. Still crying, I shouted and explained what just had happened, but when I looked back, there was no one there. I couldn't sleep at all that night. The morning after that night, I was trying to calm down myself just watching TV. There was a news about a murder case. The victim was a girl, the same as my age, and the police just found her body in front of her house's main door. Also, her wrist was cut by some sharp thing. The blood was all over her face, and there was a note behind it. She didn't try to fight back, so I killed her. It was written like this with a smiley face. My heart dropped, that is for sure. It must be the same guy who I met yesterday. What if I didn't resist? What if I didn't shout a scream for help? And what if no one opened the door? It is said to be the man is still wanted. To tell the truth, I just don't want to meet that guy in my neighborhood. Never, ever again.
My name is Paul. I play a lot of video games with my group of friends. Recently, we've been playing Among Us most nights. Every time my friends and I played video games together, we always used our mics, and a lot of times, we just trolled other players. We were playing Among Us and had a lot of discussions about who the killers could be. Me and my two friends, whose names were Harry and Wayne, thought it was the guy named Sean, and so did the rest of the lobby. We eventually voted him to be ejected. During the discussions, Sean was getting more and more aggressive, insisting it wasn't him who was the killer. And me and my two friends actually found it quite funny. After the game, Harry had received a message from a guy named Sean saying he wasn't the killer, and we shouldn't have ejected him, and so on. Wayne thought it would be funny to invite Sean into our lobby to troll him the whole game, and tell the rest of the players in the discussion that we think Sean's the killer. So that's what we did. We played the 2 games with the Sean guy, each time trolling him and saying that he was the killer and getting him ejected. Sean eventually left our lobby, and we didn't play with him again that night. I'm a light sleeper and wake up to the slightest of sounds. I woke up around 2 a.m. by the sound of a car. I looked out my window and I saw a car parked just outside my house. The car was still running, but no one got out, no one got in the car. I looked around and saw my street to be empty. Just before trying to go back to sleep, my computer started up. I went over to my computer and there was a blue screen. In the middle of the blue screen was an icon that said, "Open for discussion." I clicked on it and it revealed a very gory photo of a man who was cut in half, and underneath was written, "You have been ejected." I tried to move the mouse and turn off my computer, but it didn't work. The only thing to do was to look at the gruesome photo. My computer did turn off eventually, and as soon as it did, that car that was outside my house slowly drove off. The next day I woke up and saw a text from my friends Harry and Wayne, and they both said they had similar experiences, that they received weird pictures on the computer and phones, pictures of people cut in half. I asked them both if they think it was something to do with that guy we were trolling. They both didn't know what to think. I thought that Sean guy somehow found out where we lived and hacked our devices. What scares me is how real the photos were, and how he knew where me and my friends lived and was able to hack our devices so easily.